When most people think of religious persecution, especially persecution against Christianity, most Christians associate that with the Muslim world, are happening in places such as Africa and Asia, and majority Muslim nations are communist countries. A part of the world that many American Christians might be surprised where Christian persecution happens is in Latin America, including Mexico, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, because the dominant religion is Christianity, specifically Catholicism in Latin America. So how could there be Christian persecution in any of those societies so close to the United States? There is many times that there has been violent persecution of church leaders and Christians and pastors and priests in Latin American countries, especially in times of dictatorship and civil war. But I'm going to talk about currently the countries in Latin America where there is the most persecution against the church and Christians. And those places would be Mexico, Nicaragua, Colombia, Haiti, and to a degree, Cuba. So different Christian groups such as Voice of the Martyrs, Open Doors International, Global Christian Relief do reports and send out magazines highlighting testimonies of persecuted countries, persecuted Christians in these different countries I listed, and also have website resources having detailed reports on Christian persecution happening in places such as Mexico and Colombia. I'm going to go through these different countries one at a time and what are the forms of persecution and violence against the church happening in these countries. Because each one is unique. It's not all the same in all those countries, what's happening. The first country that I want to talk about in this video will be Mexico, since Mexico is the United States' next door neighbor that shares a border. It is the closest to home. From what I've been reading in many Voice and Martyr magazines and other Christian websites, violence against Christians and the church in Mexico has really increased since around 2010. The biggest source of persecution and violence is from the drug cartels in Mexico, as Mexico in general has become more and more violent and out of control due to all the different drug cartels in Mexico fighting for control of the country. Many Christian leaders, pastors, and priests who speak out against the drug cartels have been killed for it, assassinated. I have seen and read stories of pastors and priests who have been kidnapped and held for ransom by the drug cartels of Mexico, and churches being set on fire when they refuse to pay extortion money to the drug cartels of Mexico. This is really sad, and it is only getting worse, as in general the violence is getting worse in Mexico. The church is not being spared, and they're getting attacked too by all the different cartels, and that is the major Christian persecution, that is happening currently in Mexico. The next country I want to talk about is Nicaragua in Central America. Nicaragua is the second poorest country in the Americas and has been for a very long time. And since around 2018, the government of Nicaragua, which is controlled by Daniel Ortega, has been becoming more and more of a iron-fisted dictatorship, and the church is not being spared either. Daniel Ortega and his wife have been controlling Nicaragua since 2007. He was originally the leader of Nicaragua during the 1980s and left office in 1990, and then he came back to the presidency of Nicaragua in 2007. But around 2018, when there were a lot of protests against him, he started doing brutal crackdowns on protests. And when Catholic Church leaders started speaking out against it, the Nicaraguan government, ever since, has been having church leaders arrested and jailed. And that is still going on to this day in Nicaragua. The arresting and jailing of church leaders. They're not being spared in these crackdowns. The South American nation of Colombia is a place where Christians have been experiencing violence for decades, and that's due to Colombia's long-running civil war. Colombia has been in a state of civil war since 1948, and that has not stopped. And in the civil war, with so many different factions in the Colombian civil war, the church has been attacked several times. Some of the different groups that attack Christian leaders and the church and view the church as a threat in Colombia are some of the different communist insurgent groups of Colombia, like the FARC, the FARC. They did a lot of violent attacks on church leaders and kidnappings and killings, as did the ELN, and also drug-related paramilitary groups in Colombia have also done violent extortions and attacks on church leaders and on churches. And the Colombian military itself has committed its fair share of war crimes in Colombia's civil war also. And to this day, especially in rural Colombia, there is still no safety for many churches in Colombia. Turning to the Caribbean, Haiti in the Caribbean, which is in total anarchy right now, especially at the hands of different armed criminal gangs, there has been an upsurge in attacks on the church there, and including on foreign missionaries. In Haiti, different armed gangs have been kidnapping pastors and priests and holding them for ransom. Also, American missionaries volunteering in Haiti have at times been kidnapped and held for ransom. And this year, 2024, a young American couple who are missionaries from Missouri were killed in Haiti. There is no safety for the church in Haiti. Violence against Christians in the church in Haiti is also not new. It has happened many times at the hands of different government death squads also and in the past. And it's still continuing on to this day. There is no safety for the church. Our missionaries in Haiti. What I also want to add about Haiti is there really is a lot of spiritual warfare in that country with the strong presence of voodoo in that country, which is a demonic witchcraft religion that is satanic, and a lot of it has to do with a lot of the dark spiritual turmoil in Haiti, which drives a lot of the violence in that country, including against the church. It is very much intense spiritual warfare in Haiti, and voodoo has a big part in it. Also in the Caribbean, the island of Cuba. Cuba, to this day, remains a communist country. In the 1960s, at the very beginning of the 1960s, is when Cuba came under communism because of Fidel Castro and his people when they took over the island after the Cuban Revolution. And during the 1960s and the 1970s, the Cuban Communist government did actively persecute Christianity and the church in Cuba to try to make the country a communist atheist state. Many churches were closed in the 1960s, and the Catholic Church leaders were arrested and jailed, and the Cuban government banned the public celebrations of religious holidays. The persecution of the church in Cuba started to diminish in the 1980s. That is when the Cuban government started reducing their persecution of the church, and the religious holidays such as Christmas in Cuba were unbanned. So to this day, there is still some harassment for the church from the Cuban government when it comes to churches wanting to build new churches. Oftentimes, the Cuban government doesn't give permission for the construction of new churches. So there's still some legal harassment that the Cuban church experiences from the government. And, of course, if some church leaders in Cuba get really vocal and criticizing the government, yes, they will be arrested and jailed for it. But American missionaries, interestingly enough, are able to travel now to Cuba and volunteer there. Ever since the United States reestablished diplomatic relations with Cuba in 2015, American churches are free to be able to visit and volunteer and work in Cuba with the Cuban churches, and the Cuban government doesn't stop it. And before 2015, it was very difficult for American missionaries to try to enter Cuba and bring Bibles with them. So there's been a lot of progress in Cuba compared to the 1960s, but there's still some lingering difficulties for the church in Cuba. So in conclusion, after everything I talked about in this video, here's what I want to say for North American Christians who are learning about all this, what I talked about. The one thing that Christians in North America can do is obviously pray for their persecuted brothers and sisters in Christianity in these Latin American countries such as Mexico, Nicaragua, and Colombia. Also, Christians in the United States and Canada should learn more of the testimonies of brave Christians in these countries and how persecuted Christians persevere in their faith despite harassment and attacks against them. Also, if there's any ways that Christians in the U.S. and Canada would want to financially support churches in these countries. I encourage everyone to want to learn more beyond what I just covered in this video. And thank you for watching.